Hello, and welcome to Cavendish College's Project Management Seminar. My name is Juan Zuliani, and today we're going to be looking at the project management fundamentals and the project lifecycle. We'll start off by looking at the learning outcomes of this seminar. Then we're going to analyze the fundamental components of project management and the project selection process. We are then going to look at the project lifecycle, and we're going to finish with an exercise to put everything that we've learned today into practice. The learning outcomes of this seminar is what you are meant to learn after today's experience. So, following the completion of today's session, you should be able to define projects and project management. You will also be able to prioritize alternatives in the project selection process and understand the main components of projects. Then we're going to critically analyze and apply the different phases of the project management lifecycle. So let's start with understanding what projects are. There are endless definitions of projects by different authors, different approaches, and different schools of thought. However, in short, we can condense all of this knowledge into the following definition. Projects are ideas brought to life in a particular constrained environment, with a beginning and an end, through the synergetic integration of knowledge, time, capital, and other resources in a coordinated effort to achieve a set of SMART objectives through a series of monitored tasks, which are divided into stages, are bounded by a specific scope, and aimed at delivering quality by providing beneficial change and value to an organization and its stakeholders. So now that we have a clear understanding of what projects are, we are now going to look at what project management actually is. Now, project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to projects, to their activities, in order to meet or exceed the stakeholders' needs and expectations. Now, project management mainly deals with being able to balance different demands. Now, these demands typically involve time, your schedule. They also typically involve scope, the breadth of your project, the budget, all financial implications, and the quality that your project is aimed to deliver. Now, different needs and expectations or various stakeholder groups also need to be considered, and it's a responsibility of the project manager to make sure that all stakeholder groups get what they expect from the project. There are different concepts that we must begin to distinguish. For example, an operation and a project. What's the difference between them? Well, operations are repetitive and ongoing. So, for instance, in a production line of a company, let's say a manufacturing company, where they are constantly assembling cars. Now, this is a repetitive and ongoing process, which is very different to a project, because a project is temporary and unique. So, a project could be to develop a new product. So, it goes from the inception of the idea to design, testing, validation, and finally the launch. Now we can clearly distinguish that this has a beginning and an end. We can divide that into stages, and we make use of different resources. We coordinate them in order to meet the needs of our customers. So that's a project. In modern organizations, the same firm can undertake several projects at the same time. Now, often these projects can be interrelated to each other. This is called a program. A program may involve several projects that aimed towards the same goal. So, for example, the government has several education programs. And part of the projects that compose this program include building schools or improving curriculums or training teachers. Business plans, for example, can be considered programs because they require several projects to interact together. Now that we have a clear definition of what projects are, what project management is, we must dig in deeper and look at the main components of project management. So we can see that we must start by defining the project scope. We must know how extent we want our project to be. What is the breadth of the project? We must also know our objectives. We must know our strategy and how that is linked to the project. We must know our budget, know how much money do we have, how much money do we need, and how are we going to spend it. We must know our schedule, our time constraints, our deadlines, our milestones. We must understand our customers' needs and expectations, and we must know our stakeholders. Now, our stakeholders involve different groups of people, organizations, or anyone who has an interest in the project. They can also include the project sponsor and the project shareholders. Now, we also need to know the project management methodologies. We must understand what kind of quality requirements are expected from the project and what are the environmental risks and the environmental uncertainties that are present in our project. We must know what kind of resources we have at our disposal to carry out the project. And overall, we must know our culture. Where is our project going to be carried out, and what are the cultural aspects that influence project completion and successful termination. So let's start to look at this individually. We start by looking at the project scope. Now, the project scope is the work that needs to be accomplished to deliver a project, a service, or a product with expected results and specialized features and functions. Think of the project scope as the boundaries of your project. How extent do we want our project to be? So we must understand what the project is, and we must understand what the project is not. Now, the project scope statement is work-oriented. It gives us the hows and the whats need to be achieved, what must be completed in order for the entire project to be terminated. The project objectives are important to look at them under a SMART perspective. The SMART perspective is an acronym that starts with the letter S, meaning specific, significant, or stretching. Your objectives also need to comply with the second SMART requirement, which is measurability, making them meaningful and motivational for the people involved. Project's objectives also need to be agreed upon by different members of the organization and by the project management team. They need to be attainable, achievable, acceptable, and action-oriented. Objectives need to also be realistic, relevant, reasonable, rewarding, and results-oriented. And last but not least, we've got the time aspects, tangible and traceable. At this stage, it's important to distinguish the difference between a project's objectives and the project's aims or the project goals. Now, the project's objectives are much more precise, and normally they involve a shorter span of time, whereas goals, they tend to be more vague, and they often have a long-term focus. So, for example, a profitability objective of a company would be to achieve a 20% return on capital employed by August 2019. Now, here we're talking about something specific, which is a return on capital employed. We're also giving quantitative requirements for the project. We're making it measurable by specifying that we need this capital employed to give us a 20% return. And we are also complying with the time-based characteristics of project because we're setting a date, August 2019. Now, considering the different resources and the different possibilities that the organization has in its environment, we can then determine if the project is achievable and if it's realistic or not. To say that we want to increase market share or raise brand awareness, these would be goals or aims, because notice how these two statements don't include any measurability components and they are not being bounded by a specific period of time. Then again, we come back to the original definition of projects that say that they have to have a specific start and an end time. Now that we know our objectives, we need to identify what strategy are we going to use, not only to deliver the projects, that comes later in project management methodologies, but most importantly, what is the strategy of the organization? A project's objectives need to be linked and coordinated with the strategy. Think of the strategy as the master plan, a plan that integrates the company's mission, vision, goals, objectives, resources, and tactics. The strategy is going to synchronize the environmental scanning results and the organization's needs. Now, by environmental scanning, we need to look at the internal and external environment, and I'm going to give you some tools on how to assess what is going on in the company's environment. The strategy also provides the implementation guidelines, not only for the project, but for the organization as a whole, and also provides monitoring and evaluation tools. Moving along, we come to the project budget. Now, the project budget is the quantification of resources needed to achieve a task by a set time, involving an amount of work. Now, budgets are financial and/or quantitative statements that are prepared and approved prior to a defined period for the purpose of attaining an objective for a specific period of time. They are planned cost for an activity or project. Budgets will tell us essentially how much money do we need, how much money do we have, and how are we going to spend it. Think of the budget also as a financial interpretation of the scope, objectives, the client, and quality. The project schedule is also a fundamental component of project management. The schedule are the planned dates for starting and completing activities and milestones. A milestone is a significant event in the project and usually completion of a major deliverable. Think about it as a checkpoint that involves zero time and zero effort. Budgets and schedule needs to be integrated with each other, because depending on how much time we have, we're going to have an implication on the cost. So to know the timeline of the project in one or more of the following terms, as a milestone, deliverables, activities, and deadlines, is essential in order to provide sound financial planning. There are different tools that can be used for organizing the schedule of a project. Here we can have a look at some of them. On the top part, we can see a Gantt chart. Now notice how on the left-hand side we have identified the activities on a sequential numbering, and they specify the duration of the activity. We also have a description of the tasks, and then we assigned a specific start and finish dates. Now, on the right-hand side of this Gantt chart diagram, we see several bars with a timeline on top. Now, this provides a graphical interpretation of the budget, which makes it easier for different members of the team to know what needs to be done when, what must be done first or after the specific activities, and who is the person for delivering these results and completing these activities. On the lower part of the slide, we see a network diagram. Now, network diagrams, they can include PERT diagrams, so program evaluation review techniques. They involve critical path method and critical path analysis. They provide a network to understand what activities must be completed when and which ones come before. So both of these tools can be used to prepare your project budget. After having understood what are some of these key components, we must then look what happens outside of the project. Most importantly, who is our customer? Now, the customer is the person, organization, or group of stakeholders whose needs are satisfied by the project. Often, they are also the financial sponsors of the project. So we're not only talking about whose needs we're satisfying, but who's actually paying for the project to be implemented. So if, for example, an advertising agency offers different types of service for publicity, for marketing, and for promotion. Now, they have a contract by a multinational company that wants to adapt a particular campaign to a particular target audience in a particular culture. So these would all define not only the project as a customer, which would be the client who would be paying for these necessities, but they will also be the financial sponsors because they would be paying for these kind of services to be undertaken. Now, when we're dealing with customers, it's important to listen to what they have to say, but not just listen to what they are saying. It's also important to put yourselves in their situation and think of their necessities as if they were your own. It's important to feel like they feel. It's important to visualize their problems from their perspective, not just as your own. Then you must understand the differences, which often they are quite differences between what the customer requests, what the customer wants, and what the customer needs. To better exemplify this concept, let's have a look at these sets of images. On the top left, we can see what the customer requested. Here we see a banana boat with a windmill on top. That's highly impractical. However, this is very common, or a miscommunication barrier that occurs when a customer does not request exactly what they need. But the problem is not just there. Look at the second slide to the right. We can see what the business analyst understood. Here we see a small sailboat with a fan attached to it, and it's unplugged. What kind of functionality is that? Then we see what the sales team described, and the sales team, what they will be selling or what they will be describing, looks like this huge yacht with trained dolphins on a sunset. But look at what the project management team actually delivered. A submarines with sails and a plug that is not even plugged. Not practical at all. What was actually documented is nothing. And that is one of the main problems in project management, the lack of documentation. But when we see what the customer was paid for, he paid for the Titanic, but it was implemented the same way that the Titanic was implemented, and the type of support that was provided was probably the same kind of support that the victims of the Titanic accident had to go through. Now, what the customer actually needed was a very simple type of sailboat in order to satisfy their needs. But look at the disparities between what the customer needed and what the customer requested. So it's not just a matter of listening what they're saying, but understanding what they need. And once you understand their need, it's important to have a clear, transparent, and smooth communication throughout the entire project management team to ensure that this kind of mistakes don't happen. Now, the customer is not the only person whose the project is going to have an impact on. Here is when the concept of stakeholders needs to be analyzed. Stakeholders are persons and organizations such as the customer, the sponsor, the performing organization, and the general public that are actively involved in the project or whose interests may be positively or negatively affected by the execution or completion of the project. Now, they may also exert some type of influence on the project and its deliverables, but that is not always the case. For instance, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of incentives and pressures from government and from environmental groups about the project involving the third runway in London's Heathrow Airport. Now, this is a major project that has several stakeholders. Let's identify a few. Well, first, we would have the project management team, or the airport in general, the BAA, which is the group that controls Heathrow. We also see the airlines, or we can also identify travelers as main stakeholder groups. We also can identify the different contractors, suppliers, and all the actors in the supply chain who will be involved in this project in some way or another. But it's also important to identify the communities that live in the surrounding environment as main stakeholders. Why? Because they will be directly affected by the project. In which way? By the sound pollution that it generates, by the air pollution that it generates, by the traffic and congestion that a new runway will cause for their community. So they will be severely affected by the project. Even though they might not be directly involved in the planning or organization or actual construction of the project, they have a say on whether or not this project will actually go on or not. Now, stakeholders can be classified into internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. And it's important to understand the necessities of each group and to balance these necessities in the initial phases of the project. Projects are aimed to deliver quality results to satisfy specific needs. So, in order to understand how these results must be prepared, we must understand the main characteristics of quality. Quality can be understood as the standards and criteria to which the project products must be delivered for them to perform effectively and efficiently in order to satisfy the needs of the customer and the project sponsors. There are different indicators of quality. Think about it. What gives quality to a particular product? You go into a shop and you buy a garment, or you buy a car, or you buy a service online. You expect some standard characteristics of this product or service that you purchase in order for them to be classified as with high quality or low quality. So functionality expected to solve the actual problem is one of the main characteristics and main indicators of quality. Do they create value and benefits? Do they meet the service performance requirements, availability, usability, reliability, practicality, maintainability, durability, appearance, cost, and delivery time? These are all indicators of quality that must be looked at individually, and they combined provide the overall quality of a project. Now, think of the quality as a characteristic that will set you aside from the rest. Now, only the best stand out from the rest, and it's important for you to embrace the indicators of quality to the core strategic planning of your project so that you can deliver what's expected. Now, you must know that quality is not just about meeting a deadline or delivering expected results. It's about the overall completion of your project. The bitterness of poor quality will linger long after the sweetness of meeting the date is forgotten. What does this mean? Well, it's not just about doing something on time, it's doing it right. And often companies realize that they have to pay much more if they are to deliver a product or launch a product before it is totally ready. Mobile phone companies, for example, experience this a lot. They might develop new models or new handsets that they would like to deliver before the Christmas season, but they fail to test them properly, and only after they realize that their products have a faulty device or they have reception problems. When this occurs, they must take back all their products that they have already launched, which has a significant effect on the company's performance, in their costs, and in the brand image that it creates on customers. Now, let's take a short break right now, and let's continue in a couple of minutes.